All right, I'm gonna do my video race report for crushing the Tushar. I don't feel like writing it out, so I'm just gonna talk and just whatever comes to mind, I'll talk to you about it. So the race started pretty early at 6:10, and it was an early morning for us. It was nice and cool. It wasn't hot. It was dark when we got there. We got our bikes ready. It was a little rushed, and there were some things that I think could have been better. Like they had a bunch of washrooms, like porta potties, and there was a huge lineup. So I just said, okay, well, I gotta skip all that stuff and just get to my race start. And things started off okay, except my heart rate sensor wasn't connecting, and but other than that, I mean, power was working. That's all I really need. You can feel your heart and kind of know how you're doing during the course of the race. I wasn't too concerned about the heart rate not being there. Honestly, the race consists of two climbs up the same mountain, and I think it's like 2,002 kilometers up one way or something like that. I have to double check the numbers, but it's a mountain. You're climbing a mountain on gravel, and I actually really enjoyed it. Like the first climb, everything went good. Um, and I wasn't able to stay with the front of the pack. I didn't anticipate being able to stay with the front of the pack because I'm a bigger guy, and being at the front and hot days, my worst matchup, and I just wanted to do this kind of race for the experience. And so I was happy, as you getting up in the elevation. I didn't, I don't feel the altitude affecting me. Like there's nothing. It doesn't feel like I'm out of breath. But what happens is that, I can see my watts kind of creeping down, right? So, what is 350 watts? How that feels for me normally, kind of feels more like 400 watts, if just to give you an example. And so I was happy with the numbers that I was doing. The placement I was at, I was probably still in like top 15 or something by that point. And then came the descent. And the descent, like there was a bit of a descent and it kind of wells back up. And then you got the final descent all the way down to the bottom of the mountain. And I refilled at the feed before you go down. And I'm doing one of the corners, and I'm going fast because I have a new drivetrain set up, where I have a 9-tooth cassette with a 40-tooth chainring, and I can pedal at 70 kilometers an hour, like doing 120 RPM or something, right? So I was loving it. You're just cruising down, kind of trying to watch other people's lines and doing that. And I came to this one corner, and it was just absolutely like I'm used to cornering on gravel. So when I looked at it, I thought it was fine with the speed I had, but I found out really, really, really quickly that I was overcooking it. And the problem was that I couldn't brake effectively because it was really like thick, chunky, loose rock that you couldn't really tell until you kind of got there. And I almost went over. Like honestly, that changed the race for me. Because I've got a family, I've got a wife and a daughter, and that was too close for comfort. I basically saved it by kind of like blocking up the back wheel, and I took my foot out and I sort of drifted the back wheel around the corner, and I just barely cleared it. And like from then on, I was going descending pretty carefully. But the descent down this mountain is no joke. Like I've never descended a mountain on a road bike or on a gravel bike. Actually, no, it's not true. I've done a road bike partial mountain descent, but it's not like with the switchbacks and stuff. And what really caught me off guard was what do you call those? The washboard. There's just washboard everywhere, and it really rattles you like to the core. And I think one of the mistakes I did is I had my tire PSI set to around 35-ish PSI for a 57 mil tire. And I wanted it a little bit higher so that, because the race was like 40% pavement, 60% gravel, and I didn't really want it kind of mushy for that thick gravel. But in retrospect, I think that the descent was consequential enough that I think I would have been better off just running like 17 PSI to sort of glide over all those washboards and bumps. But either way, I mean, after that close call, it just took a lot of the confidence out of my descending. And, for someone from Saskatchewan, I'm happy with that. So, next part, things started to, another thing that happened is basically in that washboard on the descent, one of my water bottles came loose. I actually ended up losing 2 out of 3 water bottles, but one of the water bottles came loose and jammed right into my back wheel, and it took out one of the spokes. I'll come and show you what happened here. It's insane. So, I don't know how, yeah, you can see that right there. There's a broken spoke. Thankfully, when I bought this wheel set, it came with a couple extra spokes, so hopefully it's fixable. I had to twist tie the one spoke around another spoke so that it wasn't hitting the frame. And then, I wasn't really sure if I should, DNF at that point or not. But my experience I've had bikes that, as a kid where, I've had missing spoke here and there, and it didn't really affect much. But I was looking at the back wheel and their carbon rims, and I could see that the wheel was a little bit out of true. I would have DNF'd if it was rubbing on the frame, but it thankfully had kind of stabilized. So I just kept descending and got onto the pavement. And on the pavement section, I was able to just fly, because I'm really comfortable descending with a road bike. So I was basically going at least over 70, right, kilometers an hour, and I could feel the back wheel being out of true, kind of going back and forth. It was eating up a lot of power. I couldn't really, I could see other people descending, and as a bigger guy, it should be easier for me to kind of roll past everyone, but it wasn't happening because that wheel was really kind of out of whack. So then you continue through the race at the bottom, and you basically, once you get to the bottom of the descent, you ride through the town Beaver, where this race starts at, and you ride back up to the same mountain that I descended from, but you ride up through a different ascent, if that makes any sense. There's a few different ways to get up to the top of the mountain. And going through there's one of the beginning, there's something called the Sarlacc pit. I guess that's a Star Wars reference. But, the Sarlacc pit, it's this, the best way to describe it is you see these photos of Mars, and you got this sand everywhere and this thick, chunky rocks. That was interesting to ride through. I'd say, as someone from Saskatchewan, with the kind of gravel we have, and having wider tires on my bike, it felt overrated, how everyone was describing it as this super crazy race ending place. And I was actually slowly kind of gaining on some people for a bit. But my biggest problem with the race happened. I could not hold down carbs. I had my gels, nothing. It just wasn't agreeing with my stomach. I don't know what happened, but it was pretty awful. And I tried eating some stuff, and it just felt like I was going to puke, right? So I had to make the call, again, am I going to DNF, or am I just going to keep riding? And I promised my wife, she's right here, by the way. I promised her I'd meet her at the top, right? and she's doing the shorter distance, so we didn't know who's going to get to the top first. But I promised her I'd make it to the top, and so I just decided, I'm going to press on. I've done a couple rides prior where, like I've riding like zone 1, low zone 2, and one thing I noticed about riding like that is I'm actually able to ride pretty much indefinitely without bonking. So I made the call, I'm going to just try to climb up this last climb here, this last mountain, and just drink water because that's all I can handle. So I did it. It was a really, really, really tough climb because at this point it's sunny, and it's starting to get hot. There's no wind, and you got that, I was going up the same descent that I went down, and there's a lot of washboard, but you're kind of rolling over it pretty slow, and like a 10-12% grade with like it just doesn't, you go so slow that it doesn't feel like washboard, but it's still kind of annoying to ride on. But it's hard to find a good line on half that climb. And it was kind of, there was a definite switch from like, I'm racing this race to I'm just going to try to finish the race. I'm going to try to survive it, I wasn't going to let the crusher and the Tushar crush me, if that makes any sense. So I just continued on. And I did have a little bit of some other issues too. Like, you always, every time you do these like new kind of races, you learn things. And, they help make you a better racer for next time. So hopefully you don't make those same mistakes again. And one of those problems was that I had the top tube sticker, like showing the race profile and where the feed stations were. Well, they're in miles, and my bike computer, everything's in kilometers. So I really couldn't wrap my head in the moment, like what, I know the calculation, it's like 1.6 kilometers is 1 mile roughly, but I couldn't do the math at the time. And I made an error of judgment where I didn't refill on water on the last feed station before going up the climb. So I had like 1 liter of water, just straight water. And I climbed up all the way to the next feed station, and it was brutal because I ran out of water fairly quickly. And you get to this point where you see all these dropped water bottles from people that were coming down that descent, and you're looking at those water bottles and you're thinking like, should I dump that on me? Should I drink it? Thankfully it didn't get that bad, but there was a super steep section where I did end up having to kind of like get off. I got off and I walked for maybe like 100 meters just to sort of give my body a rest, because I didn't want to, get a heat stroke or whatever. Maybe I would say my condition was like partial heat exhaustion, kind of getting there. But I was still sweating good. I didn't, my mouth wasn't dry or anything. I wasn't like dizzy. So, I just barely survived and made it to the feed station. And that place was amazing, especially when you're in that condition, where you're just so strung out. They had, the people like volunteering or working there were super fast with the water. Like, they just grabbed my water bottle and filled it within like a second or something, passed it back to me. Like, you could basically just sort of roll through and they'll, help you out. So they did a tremendous job. They had, they gave out like a little cloth bag with ice, and I put that in there. They had people spraying people with like water. That was great. It just felt so good to just cool down like that. And so it sort of gave me some hope that, I'm going to be able to finish this. And I basically, I stopped at pretty much all the feed stations just to top up on water. I just didn't want to run the risk of running out of water. And after, once you get to the top, you finish the climb. There's sort of like a Twin Peak thing or something where you kind of ride down and it's flat and you ride back up. Well, anyway, somewhere around that point, my stomach did start feeling better. So I did try to eat some carb gels or whatever. And every time I had one, it kind of made my stomach kind of regress a bit. So I just sort of decided, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to continue riding, unfueled. I could feel those carbs kicking in though every time I took it, because I was able to kind of do like a zone 3 type effort temporarily, which was great. Um, and then I basically just continued that, pushing through, and I finally made it to the finish line. I think I must have been like 5 hours in or something. It was, and I was hoping to, finish it maybe by like, 4.5 hours. So I am honestly, I'm super, uh, like proud of myself for not quitting, making it through. So it was definitely one of the hardest races, or no, it's the hardest race I have ever done in my life. Uh, Ghost of the Gravel doesn't even like come anywhere close to what I went through. So that's my race report.